Empire. The proliferation of the NFT through the lens of an early adopter.
My interest, lies in the intersection of, athletes to athlete communities and the fun of a fan, being a collector and engaging with your favorite teams or athletes.
That's Gagan Palrecha, CEO of NFTSTAR, where we'll discuss his initiatives in the uber fast-moving sector of collectibles and utility. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. Gagan Palrecha was a former vice president at Dapper Labs, which hit the NBA Top Shot, the first true mainstream hit in the NFT sports collectible marketplace. This conversation runs the gamut of where things were, where they're going, and what's next. Our guest this week is Gagan Palrecha, who is the CEO of NFTSTAR, as we will look into the future of the NFT marketplace and look back at some of his building blocks as the former vice president at Dapper Labs. Hey, Gagan, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing great. How are you?
Give me your background on NFTs in general. When did it start for you? When did you kind of get into this space?
Sure. Yeah. So, my background, generally spans, 20 years within technology, and it's always been sort of in, forward-looking technology. And so a lot of my personal interests, around art and technology and collecting, that started very early in my career, and very early in my life, going back to, music and concerts and games and all that kind of stuff. And so I got into NFTs roughly in 2017, when CryptoKitties came to prominence, and I've been sort of following personally ever since. And then back in 2020 and 2021 is sort of when I decided to jump in professionally.
Were you surprised at all about CryptoKitties and those kind of early entrants into the marketplace and how popular they became?
I think NFTs in general, the use cases that have come to prominence have been really telling and really interesting, right? A lot of people in crypto kind of have been looking, and myself included, have been looking for sort of serious implementations of blockchain over the years.
Yeah.
And, the fact that collectibles kind of became the thing that, got people interested and excited, I think it's very logical, right? It takes an experience that we all have in the real world, and it applies it to, new technology that creates ownership in the digital world. So, it doesn't surprise me necessarily. I think it's more of like, it was more a question of like when people will sort of discover this idea of digital ownership and assigning value in the digital world.
And it's just that collectibles is where it kind of fit. You kind of felt all along something is going to matter here. Is that kind of the best way to put it?
Yeah. I mean, I think digital ownership and creating value sort of in the digital world, to me, has always been something, that resonated. From the perspective of NFTs, I think with anything in life, and particularly in blockchain and crypto, the more you can mirror experiences that people already have,
yeah,
I think the more logical, people are going to look at it very logically, and they're going to make decisions on their interest from there. And, baseball cards, for example, really exciting and important part of our history and culture, and it makes logical sense here in NFTs.
Yeah. When you say you kind of started at a young age collecting, and you mentioned genres like music and gaming and something like that, what do you mean by that? You were just interacting with it, or you were kind of digitally collecting at a young age?
Yeah. So sorry, when I say collecting, I kind of look at my journey of NFTs to predate NFTs, right?
Yeah.
So, I was, in the 80s and 90s collecting, baseball cards and basketball cards. And, when I go to concerts, I collect the tickets,
Yeah, me too.
for all the shows. Yeah. All the shows that I've ever been to. And, similarly, like, when I used to go see the Pistons at the Palace, and my championship t-shirts and all that kind of stuff, I still have all that stuff. And I'm sort of a collector by nature, in terms of memorabilia. So for me, that sort of predates the NFT stuff, but I think that's an important bridge and an important thing for my journey in terms of, bridging sort of the old school world with the new school world around NFTs.
Okay, we'll get into NFTSTAR in a moment, but I do want to touch on your background with Dapper Labs. Can you take me a little bit through, and for those who don't know, everybody knows, but for those who don't know, their popularity really boomed with NBA Top Shot. Can you tell me a little bit about what your experience was like there and what you learned as you move forward?
Sure. So, like I said earlier, my background spans, a wide variety of technology over the last, 2 decades. And prior to NFTSTAR, I was a VP of operations, within Dapper. And Dapper is well known for the Flow blockchain, for NBA Top Shot, and a number of other NFT products. And I think, in many ways, NBA Top Shot paved the way, much more so than CryptoKitties prior, paved the way for bringing NFTs to the mainstream. And so, my interest, lies in the intersection of, athletes, the athlete communities,
Mm-hmm.
and the fun of, of a fan, being a collector and engaging with your favorite teams or athletes, right? And so one of the things that I learned along the way was that, working with leagues and teams was an important sort of step in the progression of NFTs and of collectibles, because basically you have instant access to, gameplay, essentially everything you need to sort of put out, trading cards. But as a fan, one of the things that I've learned is that, like, I want more. And one of the things that I love about, 30 for 30, for example, is, on ESPN, is that I get more, right? I get to understand and learn the stories of my favorite teams, of my favorite athletes. And so, the question I ask myself is, how do we do that in NFTs? How do we give the athlete the ability to sort of create and own their own community, to mobilize their community or their tribe in kind of the ways that are important to them? And then how do we get, fans connected to those athletes to be able to, create experiences, like we often say, experiences that money can't buy, but how do you create these experiences that are really unique, that they can have with athletes that they love? And they can love those athletes both, from a gameplay perspective, from their history, on and off the field, maybe with their charitable endeavors. And I think there's a whole sort of ecosystem around what the relationship between the athletes and the fans, really, really can be. And so, I think, like, the progression for me is one of the big things that I learned, which is, we created something that really resonated, with a lot of people out there. How do we expand it into something that's more meaningful?
Okay. A number of the people that we've talked to in this space, in this kind of second version of this, if you will, is that they seem to be focused on there needs to be some kind of utility attached to the NFT itself. Do you agree with that? Because what you're talking about is kind of having the proximity and the experience. Others are saying there needs to be utility attached. Do you kind of agree with all of that as things move forward here?
My feeling is that utility is part of experience, right? So utility can mean a lot of things. So I definitely agree that sort of access or utility is really important from an NFT perspective, because, what are you trying to represent, right? There's a piece of artwork that, you can say this is a piece of artwork and you're collecting art, right? But the reality is like, in the long run, I don't think people are going to want to be collecting art from celebrities or athletes. What I think they're going to want to do is they're going to want to have experiences tied to their relationship with the athlete. And you do that with, call it utility or call it whatever you want. But, one of the things, at NFTSTAR that's really important for us is saying, okay, well, if you're part of this community, let's kind of look at it from the perspective of like, how do we mobilize the community to address, charitable endeavors, for example, that the athlete cares about, right? How do we deliver more than just an autographed jersey? For Sun Heung-min, for example, we've got a jersey with his footprint on it, right? Like, it's a little bit of a riff on the autograph, but it's a little bit more personal. So how do we take physical merchandise and share that with the community? How do we mobilize communities amongst themselves so that they can go see games together or they can watch games virtually together? So I think there's a lot of things from a utility perspective. It's not just about getting things. It's about connecting people in ways, that they weren't able to before.
Talk to me a little bit about, you had touched on that you've worked with leagues, obviously, and you did so with Dapper. And I assume on some level you have to be working with them here. What do they want out of this? Are they trying to drive people back to their stadiums? Are they trying to work to have some incentivization behind it to get them to third-party sponsors? As you kind of see this marketplace develop, what is everyone's goals here?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I'd like to sort of take a step back here and kind of give you a quick overview on what's important to us as NFTSTAR, and that way I can sort of answer the question of like what some of these organizations and individuals are sort of most interested in, right? So NFTSTAR is a company that at the core we're basically using NFTs to bridge these relationships between the athletes and their fans. So it's not necessarily about the NFTs themselves, but it's how do you use NFTs to sort of create these unique experiences? And then the question is, why do we want to create these experiences? So, for example, 4 types of NFTs that we put out, right? They're very deliberate here. The first is a membership NFT. And so for us, this is a generative PFP type of NFT, similar to Bored Ape Yacht Club, that represents an individual athlete, right? That's sort of your gateway into being part of that athlete's tribe. We've got collectible NFTs that we also call narrative NFTs. Those are NFTs, and I brought up 30 for 30 earlier. Those are NFTs where we can tell the sort of story or the journey of the athlete. I think, whether it's Giannis, or Neymar or whomever, these athletes have pretty storied, pretty interesting journeys, right? And I think those are told today, very rarely. I mean, we like a lot of people understand kind of, Giannis's journey from Greece and, into the NBA and his hardships growing up. But, I think there's some really interesting stories there that we can tell, on behalf of the athletes. The third thing that we do is predictive NFTs. So like every game that I watch with my friends, there's a lot of razzing and all of that before the game. People are, we're always talking about essentially like, who's going to win, what the score is going to be. And so predictive NFTs give people an opportunity to sort of predict certain things in games and seasons and have those memorialized on the blockchain for bragging rights. And then the third thing that we do are dynamic NFTs. So basically the idea that your NFT can morph and change over time based on performance, of the athlete. So those are the 4 general areas that we look to use NFTs for. And, athletes care for a couple of reasons. One is they want to be able to tell their stories on their own terms.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's self-explanatory. The second thing is, that I always talk to athletes about is that not everyone can necessarily have a brand like Jordan, but everyone should have the opportunity to do so. And you may not reach the number of people that Jordan reaches, but you should be able to have a micro brand where you can explore things that matter to you with your community because your community cares, right? So whether that's, wanting to start, maybe like a t-shirt, t-shirt line with some interesting, designs that you've worked on with people around you. Maybe you're a painter and you want to put out some of your artwork to your community, whether you want to mobilize your community for charitable works or whatever. You should be able to create a brand that allows you to sort of have an instant audience to experiment with things. And it's great for the audience because they want exclusive and interesting things from the athletes themselves. And then in terms of where I think leagues and other people are going, I think it's really just about engaging meaningfully with fans and giving them experiences that are brand new, right? And if the net effect is that there are more people that show up to games and more people that watch those games on TV, that's great. But I think ultimately the goal is to really create this new pathway. And it's not about engagement necessarily. It's about co-engagement, right? It's about athletes engaging with fans, fans engaging with the athletes, and the community engaging with each other. And that's ultimately, I think, what it's about.
So we are in a space, as you described this, where we're almost in kind of personal branding 2.0. A lot of what was happening in Athletes Pass were developed by league guidelines or team functions, or they would try to control what was said or thought about the team and that person by proxy because they're wearing the uniform. As you kind of view personal branding, when you talk to athletes about this, what's important that you tell them about as they try to get into this space?
Yeah, I think the history of sport has evolved, right? It used to be completely about the teams. You've got Bobby Knight, who never wanted to put names on, backs of jerseys and everything else. And I think over time, the teams have evolved, and I think there's still an important, emphasis that, everyone puts. That's really important. But I think individuality has continued to grow within the sport, separate from teams, right? So, you have people like Russell Westbrook, for example, who's got a, pretty, known style of sort of personality and dress. And I think we're seeing individualism and personality come through, not to the detriment of team, but I think in addition to the focus on team. So we can still focus on teams and, teams win championships, right? We can focus on teams that people follow and love, but you can also have breakouts around personality. You can have breakouts around, things that matter to individuals. How can I, as an individual, as an athlete, mobilize a community? And I don't think that necessarily takes away from teams. I don't think that changes the emphasis of teams. I don't think that changes the dynamic of the game, but I do think that, individuality is something that continues to increase in value, both within sport, but also within the internet. And so the more we can kind of expose that and create pathways for that, I think it's gonna benefit, everyone at large.
Yeah, this is a broader conversation. It's kind of off track, but since we're talking about it, I mean, it's interesting. You're a basketball fan. You mentioned the Pistons. At the time that we're taping this, the Nets just got swept in the playoffs. That's semi a surprise based on the players that are on the team. Kevin Durant is extremely active, at least on social media, and is very forward thinking with a lot of different things that he's been involved in. People look at the failure of the Nets not as a failure of the organization, but a failure of him and Kyrie Irving, the two stars of the team. So it does kind of lead to this question of, does the name on the front of the jersey, is it mattering less and less and less as we fall into this more individualized type of branding for players and high-level athletes?
Sports don't exist without teams. And I think teams win championships if we're talking about basketball at the end of the day, right? You've got leaders just like anything else, and teams win championships. And I think the opportunity for the world of NFTs, I think that exposes the individual. It exposes the things that matter to them. It allows them to sort of build out a tribe and mobilize that tribe in really interesting ways. And those ways can benefit the team and they can benefit the individual. I don't personally think that, there's an erosion of, or I don't think, anything around the erosion or failure of individuals or teams is tied to, I think the logo on the front is just as important for the fan as the logo on the back. And I think for fans specifically, the logo on the front has been a big part of driving their relationship with the game. But the name on the back has always been there, right? If I go back to my collecting in the 80s, and the 90s of baseball cards and basketball cards, people were still looking for Jordan rookie cards,
That's right.
Larry Johnson rookie cards, and whomever else along the way. And I think it's no different today. I just think we live in a world that's so much more connected, and people have opinions, and people throw out opinions about teams, about coaches, about back office, about players. And I think at the end of the day, what NFTs give us, and I think what NFTSTAR is really focused on, is this idea that the athletes have personalities off the court. They have stories off the court. We want to be able to connect fans with those stories through NFT. We want to be able to connect fans to the communities and the tribes that those athletes, are at the forefront or are the heads of, to be able to give people experiences that they weren't able to have in the past.
All right, last thing. So, from the fan perspective, for those who are still listening to things like this and going, I like that, I want to be part of that, I just kind of don't know how. At what part of the educational phase are we still in of how to be involved in this way?
I mean, I think generally in the lifespan of NFTs, we're super early right now.
Yeah.
And so I think there are two types of people out there and two types of, collections out there. One is like speculative, art, right? Like, I'm going to go out and buy something because I think it's going to increase in value. There may not be a community associated with it yet, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the other side, you've got something like NFTSTAR, where, all of our collections are authorized and verified, meaning like we work directly with the athletes. And so everything we do is in partnership with the athletes. So, if you're coming to NFTSTAR and you're sort of starting your journey around, collecting your favorite athletes and wanting to get involved, in the things that are like, interesting to them and interesting to you, NFTSTAR is a great place to start because you're getting something that's sort of authentic and verified. And I think that's really important in the world today when it comes to NFTs, because there's so many sort of unauthorized things happening out there, because it's very easy for anyone to, grab something or create something and then put it on the blockchain, and then sell it. So one, I think it's important to go someplace to understand that you're getting something authentic and verified. And I think NFTSTAR provides that because of our relationship with the athletes. The second thing is, look for, I would say, if you're just starting your journey, look for things where, there are really interesting opportunities to connect with the community and the athletes directly, right? So that is, when you talk about utility, one of the things that we're doing with our upcoming Heung-min Son drop is holders of the NFT will be eligible for a signed and footprint jersey from Son, right? And I think that's a really interesting, opportunity for a lot of fans. They'll be eligible for tickets to Tottenham Hotspur matches. They'll be eligible to watch World Cup games virtually with Heung-min Son when he's not on the field. They'll be eligible for, to hear sort of commentary from Luis Figo, who's a really important, soccer player that's now retired, and kind of hearing his views, on the World Cup and the game. So I think, looking at, an organization and, like NFTSTAR and looking at kind of what we do, those are the characteristics that I would suggest somebody who's starting out their journey to look for when they're looking to get into NFTs. And, and I think just enjoy the journey and the process of connecting with fans and athletes.
Gagan Palrecha is the CEO of NFTSTAR. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
On the next Future Sport podcast, let's delve into free-to-play gaming as an engagement tool.
You name it, we can create it, and we've invested super heavily in our tech stack over the last 3 years, where now what we're able to do is spin up a game for a franchise on almost any iteration that they can think of, have it live and sort of out there with their fans.
That's JB Mitchell, CEO of Low Six, where free-to-play is allowing teams and leagues to remain modern and relevant with their fans. That will do it for this episode. As always, the future is now. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein.